Welcome back to the Better Everyday podcast, where we are unlocking our best self one episode at a time. My name is David Garcia, and this is my beautiful co-host, Grace Garcia, which is my beautiful wife. And today is a new episode of the Better Everyday podcast, and we are excited about this one. This one's going to be an interesting one, and let's just get into it. Today, I thought it would be important, kind of based off what we were talking about in the last couple of episodes. We did the one where it was about the focus, accepting everything, embracing everything.
Yeah.
And kind of like, again, piggybacking off of that one, I thought it would be very interesting to talk about the stories that we tell ourselves. And you might be sitting there listening to me and saying, what are you talking about, the stories that we tell ourselves? And I actually did a little bit of research on this, and it turns out that our brains run on stories to make sense of our life. And it's crazy because when you actually think about it, it's just like, there's a story for everything.
Yeah.
For everything. And like, you might be asking like, well, give me an example so I could start to understand this. An example could be as simple as I'm telling the story to myself that I'm not a reader, which I actually heard a lot last year when we were like, Atomic Habits, you need to read Atomic Habits. We got a good amount of people that said, I'm not a reader. And that is a story that you tell. That story originates from a certain point in your life. Mm-hmm. Another story that you might be telling yourself is everyone is against me. Maybe you're one of those people that just think like you're always having to look over your shoulder. You're always having to maybe not trust the people around you because you're just like, everyone's out to get me. Like I can't put down my guard. I have to have my guard up all the time because nobody's going to look out for me and everyone's just waiting to just rip me to shreds.
Yeah.
And sometimes the stories that we tell kind of fortify a feeling that we already had. So I thought it was interesting. You know how I always go, Salvadorians, just like the wheels start turning once bad things start happening. Yeah. So what we're doing in that instance where, and this might not be just Salvadorians, but we kind of overgeneralize it because we know a good amount of Salvadorians that do exactly the same thing. And so what I'm talking about is you do, like, let's say me and you are married. There's something that happens between me and you, and I start like going through the history of our marriage, the history of our relationship, and I go, the way that you hurt me right now, it makes sense because all these other times that I'm starting now to remember, you've been like this the whole time. And now that's a story that I'm telling myself. And so the stories that we tell ourselves make up how we live our life, how we portray our life, how we conduct our life. The question now comes to the stories that you're telling yourself. Are they serving you or are they doing a disservice to you? Because there are stories that can be servicing you.
Yeah.
And it could be only for a season. Because I remember, I believe we've told this story. We went to a Biola marriage conference one time. And we got like a free 30-minute session with a therapist, a marriage therapist. And we went to go see her. And I basically, what I said was almost verbatim was, I feel like the jerk. I feel like since like middle school, high school, I've always been known as the jerk. I feel like I went through so much rejection that I said, like, I don't want to live this life. This is not the life that I want to live. So what am I going to do? I need to make a change. And so I made the change to be more jerkish and not be the quote unquote nice guy anymore. And when I changed that narrative, I started to get everything that I felt like I needed at the time. And what she told me was, David, that doesn't make you a bad person. Because what you did was basically a survival mechanism. And it served you for a season. But you're not in that season anymore. And so it's time to basically, what she told me was, it's time to start telling yourself a different story. And so the stories that we tell ourselves are very, very powerful.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're subconscious. Like we don't even think about it. And we hope that through this podcast, you start to think about what are the stories that you are telling yourself? Because again, there are some stories that are not doing you a service anymore. They're actually doing you a disservice. There might be stunting your growth because in that same scenario where I was saying, hey, I feel like a jerk, I changed who I was and blah, blah, blah. And she was like, it did you like a service back then because you were surviving. Mm-hmm. Your brain or your heart felt like you couldn't take that anymore, what you were going through. And so you needed to make a change in order to survive. And it makes sense because in that time where I was talking about in like junior high and high school, I didn't feel like I had somebody that had my back. I didn't feel like I had somebody to go to like be vulnerable with, or I'd never even got taught that, like be vulnerable, open up to me. Mm-hmm. Just let it all out. I'll be here encouraging you. Like, I didn't get that. So I had to figure it out on my own. The only way to figure it out is, I either, I guess, subconsciously thought to myself, I either go into full on depression and not know how to handle it and, like spiral out of control, or I make these adjustments and I survive. And that's what I did. But I carried that through my life. And so if I would be telling myself that same story today, I'd be the same jerk that I was in middle school and high school, and that would be a complete disservice because then I'd be able to have no friends, no relationships. I'd still be kind of saying to myself, I have nobody, I'm in the corner and I need to just keep punching and I need to figure this out. I need to champion through, right? And so as I'm saying this, I hope that you already start to think, what are the stories that I've been telling myself? Because maybe you've never even thought about it. And right now you just kind of started clicking like, oh yeah, like, there's certain things like, here's another one. You come up with an assumption between a relationship of you and a friend. Let's say something happens. What can I say? You're supposed to hang out. Mm-hmm. And last minute, the person ditches, like can't make it. And maybe you're the type of person that automatically goes, the wheels start spinning, just like a Salvadoran, just like me, just like a lot of people. How rude. That's so messed up. Something cooler probably popped up. Yeah. And they're just ditching me. They found like I was just like a second whatchamacallit, like sloppy seconds. Like I was an afterthought. I was like, in case nothing else comes up, I guess I'll hang out with you or whatever. And you start coming up with this assumption. And that assumption is a story that you are telling yourself. Because as a matter of fact, you don't know the facts of what may have happened. Mm-hmm. Maybe your friend didn't fully explain it to you. Maybe they said, oh, I'm sorry, something came up. And I'm not going to be able to make it. And maybe your friend is not comfortable with telling you that. So you're left with, the only thing that you're left with is, I need to figure this out. Like, I need to make sense of it. Because there's some people that just won't let it go. Some people will just not be like, oh, okay, that's all right. I guess we'll hang out some other time. Yeah. I think there's some people out there. I'm not one of them. I don't really understand that. I need to know like why are you ditching last second? Like what came up? Like what did you not know? Like, and the wheels start turning and I start getting negative. These are the stories that I'm telling myself. And I'm like, and so if you want to go even deeper in that, if I start going like, oh, something better came up. I was just sloppy seconds. I was just in case nothing else came up. What am I really telling myself? I don't even feel like I'm worthy of this person's time. And if I was in that person's shoes and I found something better to do, I would have ditched me too. Yeah. And you start like thinking, like, where does that come from? And what my point is another thing that I like to say is when you assume things that you haven't even like asked, you haven't probed, you haven't like gotten the fact. Yeah. Being curious instead of furious. So many times what happens is, hey, like in that moment, like what happened? And the friend will tell you, oh, like my mom had an emergency and I had to, and she didn't feel comfortable with me telling anybody. And then you go, oh, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. I was thinking the worst. I thought that you just, threw me like a dirty rag and blah, 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 right? And so that story that you're telling yourself is not doing a service to you, right? And, before I keep rattling on, what do you think about this? Like, have you ever thought about it? Have you ever thought about like the stories that we tell ourselves?
I haven't titled it that, like the stories we tell ourselves. But I have thought like, okay, what are like these thoughts that I'm thinking? And it's only been now, I feel like in my late 20s, where I'm being more intentional of like, what are thoughts that what am I declaring as truth in my life? But it's basically the same thing. Like, what are the stories that we tell?
Yeah.
But it sounds like our brain is like a machine, like a computer, and we're deciding this is the program it's going to run off on, and it'll be on default without us thinking about it until we're like, okay, we need to take that program out. It's outdated, right? How you said it's no longer serving us in this moment, and like be intentional about, okay, it's time to upgrade this program. But it has to be, because I know our mind has these neurological like pathways, and like they're kind of like highways and neural. I don't know. It's so complex, but it is like a machine. It's like it's better than a computer, like our brains. And so if we just continue, like it's so easy for it to become a habit and be something that is automatic, something that we don't even think twice about. But the beauty of our mind is that God made it so where we can mold it and we can change it and we can uproot. It's not easy, but we have to put in the work. We have to be conscious about it and intentional. But we can, how you've stated in previous podcasts, like write a different story. You've mentioned that imagery of like a tattoo that you no longer like, and drawing a beautiful picture on top of it. Or in this case, creating new pathways, new thoughts, making it just part of our habit. And so, yeah, I haven't thought of it of like the stories that we tell ourselves, but I feel like how I said in my late 20s, I feel like I've been more conscious of like, what am I believing as truth? What am I believing as truth? Because I feel like if I constantly think negative, then I just feel negative, then I just act negative, then I'm moping, and then I'm not like, before I know it, I'm not liking my life, and I'm just miserable all the time.
Yeah.
Versus I'm being intentional of like, I have a negative thought because it happens. We're not perfect. Then I catch myself. That's the part of being intentional. We have to be self-aware of like, oh wait, here it is, like replaying, right? Like the radios back in the day, like, oh, it's already like restarting, it's replaying. Let me pause it. Let me change the track. Let me tell myself a good thought until you start getting used to it and you're rewriting that story.
I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, and if you don't want to answer, it's okay.
I'm just nervous.
What is a story that you feel like you tell yourself that does not do a service to you? And then what is a story that you do tell yourself that does do you a service right now, like in the season that you're in? Or maybe in the previous season, recent season?
I feel like there's a lot, so I'm like I'm thinking not to try to dodge the question, but to really give like a truthful answer. A story that no longer serves me. I think I'd tell myself like, I just don't care. Like, I'm just not empathetic. I would always tell myself that, because my little sister, Melody, shout out to Melody. I love her heart, and like, she's always loving on people, caring about people, and like, she's truly empathetic. Like, I feel like she doesn't have to try. It just comes so natural to her. And so I think in comparing myself with someone like her, or even like my mom, she got that characteristic from our mom. I'd compare and I'm like, oh, well, they're so empathetic. It comes naturally to them. So I just don't care. And I'm just a person that like, I don't care, or it takes me a long time to care. I have to put more effort. But the older I'm realizing, I'm like, I get passionate about things because I do care. And like, who told me I didn't care? Or why am I telling myself? Is it to not get attached? Is it to maybe be mediocre?
Wow.
And so I think that's something I'm like, wait, why is this kind of in my head? Like, where did it start? How long has it been there?
Yeah, let's dig into that. Where did it start? And the reason why I'm asking you this is because there might be people that are thinking similar things to you.
Yeah.
And like, it's one thing for you to acknowledge it. It's one thing for you to identify it. But now there's also like roots to it, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I was thinking about when I was thinking about this episode is, why is it that we tell ourselves certain stories? And I think a lot of times it's in order to make sense of the life that we're living, and it's in order for us to survive, right? And so maybe like what you're saying, like you're saying you're not empathetic. Maybe there was a certain point in your life where you might have tried empathy and it blew up in your face. Because what I'm thinking is, why is it that whether consciously or subconsciously, we tell ourselves certain stories?
Yeah.
And one of the answers that I think about is to protect ourselves, and like to protect our vulnerability, to protect our pride, to protect our ego. And it's like, maybe that's why there's some people that go like, oh, I don't conquer mountains. I don't do that. I'm just not that person.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, why though? Like, is it because one day you did try? And maybe it's in your subconscious, because there's, whether it's like big traumatic or sometimes it's like mini traumatic, but there's moments in our lives, especially in our childhood, where there was maybe a time, like, let's say, as a kid, you tried something and your parents yelled at you. And I know this isn't probably your case, but
Yeah.
like, many Hispanic parents, tended to yell, especially like in my generation. Like there wasn't like a, hey buddy, like it's gonna be okay. No, it was like, yo, what are you doing, whatever. And just in those moments of like just shock of hearing your parent like saying, what are you doing? Or maybe they called you a name, like just that moment could be like that spark of like, I ain't never trying this again. Because what are you trying to protect? You're trying to protect like that feeling of rejection. You're trying to protect from that feeling of fear, of not being loved, not feeling worthy, or feeling like the only thing I could really think of is a loser. Like in that moment, you don't feel like a winner. You feel like a loser. You feel like they just yelled at me. I tried something. And like, how many people have tried things at a young age and it blew up, or it seems like it blew up in their face, for them to just, again, subconsciously or consciously be like, I am never trying anything out of my comfort zone again.
Yeah.
I will stay in my comfort zone forever because I'm protected here. And again, what are you protecting? You're protecting your heart. You're protecting your pride. And so, yeah, like let's dig deeper into that. Why is there anything that you could think of that, made you be like, no, you're not empathetic? Was it maybe the fact that you, like you said, your sister and your mom was so empathetic that you said to yourself, I could never be as good as them, so I'll never try? Or what do you think?
It could be that. Like, it could be because I'm not as expressive as them, or like they would always say, like, you're so like emotionless sometimes. Like I would get a big, huge like gift, for example, and I'm not like, oh my goodness. Like I feel like I'm learning how to be more enthusiastic with my face, but I feel like compared to others, I am so much more. But I think compared to like my siblings,
really,
I wasn't. Yeah, and so they would always say like, Chris, it looks like you don't care. I'm like, no, I am grateful.
I mean, there's been times where I bought you a cup of Starbucks and you start crying. I'm like, I don't get that whole robot part.
Yeah, I think I know definitely back then, and maybe I was more brattier too, because I can think of situations where I got gifted something lavish, and I'm like, oh, thank you, and they're just like, that's it. But I think it could also be just, at least for me, like lies that the enemy tells us of, like it's too much going down this path of you care. Like if you say you're gonna care, like these are the expectations and they seem unreachable, or you're gonna fail if you go down this path of like, hey, that caring means that you have to do this now and then this and then this, and then it just seems like overwhelming. And it's like, okay, is it easier to not then? But yeah, I feel like it could be that.
Do you think that you ever saw your mom or your sister care so much that it hurt them?
Oh, for sure.
And it hurt you to see them hurt, and you said, I'm never trying this.
I've never subconsciously told myself that, But I think we said already that we are similar because you were going through therapy and you'd come back and like tell me what you learned or whatever and how you don't process the emotions because it's difficult. And then I'm like, oh, like that sounds super similar to me, which is strange because I think compared to you, I'm always seen as more emotional. I think probably because I'm like a woman, so it's just easier.
Yeah.
But then I'm like, oh, I wonder if just to survive or I just don't like dig into those emotions. Like it's a lot of work. Like I'm gonna have to really unveil it and then, okay, what am I gonna do with this now? Like, am I gonna be better or like, am I just gonna completely ignore it now that I know it's there? And so, I think my brain in some sense is like a little bit more like logical or it's like, okay, this doesn't make sense. Cause yeah, for sure. I've seen my mom and my sister where I'm like, why do you care that much though? Like you're getting hurt. Like why? Like I would tell, especially my little sister, cause I see myself obviously as an older sister, like more caring about her. And so I'd be like, it's your weakness and it's your strength all at once because you love so much and then they're just hurting you. And so maybe I internalized it like and put a pin in it. Like this is a reason why you shouldn't. Like trying to rationalize what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. That's something to think about for sure. That's deep.
That's one that I can think of on the spot that when you asked.
Yeah. And yeah, I just reiterate, like if that were to be the case where you saw your mom, your sister care so much that it hurt them and you just, like you said, put a pin in, you're like, that's one reason why not to be empathetic. And it's like, when you ask a deeper question, it's like, what are you protecting?
Yeah.
You know, are you protecting being hurt? Are you protecting being broken into pieces? And we love to say here in this podcast that there's always two sides to the coin. And when I was researching this topic, there might be even more than two sides to every coin, right? But and the reason why I said that is because I saw like this example that said two people very similar can be in the exact same scenario and they'll each tell themselves a different story. And so one person, they both work in the same place, both have the same boss. One goes, I love working here. My boss is awesome. He loves me. He takes care of me. He gives me responsibility. And the other one in the exact same scenario could go, my boss gives me way too much. He's not nice to me. He gives me more than I can handle. And so again, it's just stories that you're telling yourself, right? And you're just making sense of what you're living. And a lot of what the stories that we're telling ourselves today come from a moment in childhood, a moment growing up.
So going back to my previous example of like our brain kind of being like this computer, like this hard drive or whatever. Right now, especially with AI on the rise, like I've been using it to just simplify my life. And then I've had different companies reach out to me, kind of like, can you do a sponsored post and just talking about how our services can make specifically for a teacher, like their life easier. And there was this one that was saying how it makes grading easier. And then it starts picking up on your like preferences. So that way, the more you use it, the more it starts sounding like your voice, right? And I feel like that's also similar to the stories that we tell. Like the more we say it, it's like a preference, like it's a setting. So then subconsciously, we start recognizing like most of our stories are negative, or most of our stories are doing self-harm, or most of our stories is to just survive. Like it starts picking up this pattern and that it kind of dictates our life. And then before we know it, it's our setting. It's our default, right?
Yeah.
Would you say the stories that you tell yourself are more in one category, or do you feel like because I feel like the examples you've mentioned right now are mostly on the negative side. Do you feel like there's positive stories that you tell yourself? Do you feel like you're on this default of like just survival in this prior season and you're trying to now like change it?
So most of my life, I think it's been negative stories I've been telling myself. And I do believe that they come from childhood, growing up. For one example, I was talking to my therapist. I forget what it was, but he was like, he looked at me sideways and he was like, are you harsh on yourself? I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, do you criticize yourself a lot? Like, are you call yourself names? And I'm like, oh, all the time, dude.
And I hate it when I tell you, like, don't call yourself stupid.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot.
What?
I didn't say any names.
Oh, sorry. You wanted, they were practicing vulnerability here. Because some people might call themselves that and they need to.
No, but I almost felt like you called me stupid in that moment. I don't know.
Oh, no. I'm just saying, you'd be like, oh, I'm so stupid.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
you'll say it. And I'm like, David, don't call yourself stupid.
And so he was telling me a story that like was almost spot on with mine. And basically, he said that a parent sometimes, like, especially with firstborns, like our parents are really figuring it out. And especially if they didn't really take the time to like get a mentor in that area.
Yeah.
If they didn't read any books, like they're figuring it out, like, and that's part of one of my stories that I tell, like, give them grace, it's fine, like, they're going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
But he said, a parent insults a kid. They spilt water, he says. And they go, oh, David, you're so dumb for dropping that water. Like, don't drop that water. And the kid immediately, especially if it's his first time feeling that feeling of being called a name, being criticized, like being like, how do I say, like, just like negative feelings that he feels for making a simple mistake. Mm-hmm. He's a kid. He's going to make mistakes, but spills the water, parent calls him dumb. What are you doing? Do better. The next time the kid spills the water, what do you think he does?
He's going to beat the parents to it.
He beats the parents to it and calls himself dumb. And that is actually a story that the kid accepts, which I accepted. And it was basically like, when this happens, when a mistake happens, I am this. And before I hear it from my parent, I can better survive telling it to myself than constantly hearing it from my parent. It is much harder to hear it from a loved one, somebody who's supposed to care for you, encourage you, lift you up. It's so much heartbreaking to hear it from somebody like that than to hear it from yourself. And it's like a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
I would rather say it to myself. And there's been there's shows, there's movies, and I've seen examples also where a person is being bullied and somebody like gives them the advice of like, hey, make fun of yourself before they make fun of you, and you take away their power. Mm-hmm. And sure, you're taking away their power, but those words that are coming out of your mouth are about you. You are making fun of yourself. You are criticizing yourself. And this is the story that you are telling yourself. Like, I am these things.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I grew up with.
That's sad.
And that's, yeah, like most of the stories that I've grown up with are negative like that. Mm-hmm. There is one where I could say that was positive for the sake of survival, but now it is now doing me a disservice. And which is, I've gone through a good amount of traumatic things. I've gone through some very hard times. And being part of church, a Pentecostal church, a faith-based, boom, you pray everything away, you fast everything away, you read the Bible, everything away, it's all good. I kind of grew up with that mentality, and I now see it as just a survival mechanism where I went, it doesn't matter how bad it gets, God is in it.
Which is true.
Which is 100% true. Like, don't get me wrong, and it's going together with what I talked about last time with the focus. When I did that, I chose to ignore all the enemies. Realities. I chose to ignore all the reality, which is it sucked. Like, now I can look back at the things that I went through and be like, yo, that sucked. I even cried about what I've gone through. And I finally let out those cries. Whereas before, I'm like, I'm not going to cry. Everything's fine. God is going to mold my character through this, which he did. God is going to do such great things, which he did. but I never process the negative emotions.
Yeah.
I never process this sucks. I never process I should not be going through this. Like, what kid should be going through traumatic experiences? None of them.
Mm-hmm.
A parent's job is to protect them from that. Like, should there be struggles and stuff? Yeah, sure. But traumatic experiences, like, they should be kept to a minimum.
Yeah. Well, I have a question, because how you were saying, so you called yourself names when you were younger, like to beat your parents to it. And then I guess you minimized your situation, right? Just so that you can like just cope and go through it and not dwell on the negative, because you already had so much negative. Like, why are you going to expand on it, right? Like, you're not in the season to handle it because you were surrounded by negativity. Do you think those stories you told yourself are then, because our minds are kind of at a default, you put this program in, it's easy to like copy and paste those stories and then put it on others?
Oh yeah, 100%. Well, a lot of what I do is projection. And that's something that I've realized through therapy as well.
That's been like your favorite word. You figured out, like, you're projecting, that's projection.
It's crazy because, one thing I was like complaining about, the people that we have surrounding us, and I'm like, I want people to run with, and I want to be challenged. That's part of me being fulfilled. And basically what it came down to, he's like, if you looked yourself in the mirror, could you say that you love yourself? And I was like, no. And he's like, so if you don't love yourself, that means that you don't accept yourself. And he's like, if you don't accept yourself, how do you expect to accept other people around you that are different than you? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, just like, that to me seems like a mountain to like overcome. Like a lot of the things that like I grew up with seem like a mountain that I have to overcome.
Yeah.
And it feels hard, and it makes me emotional. Just thinking about it right now makes me emotional, because I'm just like, I wish I didn't have to go through that. Mm-hmm. I wish I didn't tell myself all those stories. I wish I didn't have to tell myself those stories back then. And I wish that I didn't go through years of repeating the same pattern. And now it's just like, again, we've talked about it here. You can't microwave things. You can't speed things up. Like, if you've been practicing this certain pattern for 20 plus years, it's like, it's not going to be like a 2-week process for you to get over this. Like,
yeah,
it's going to take time. And the one thing that has been helping me for sure, and like a tip that I want to give people, and we've said it here before, but I'll say it again, like, is the journaling. The journaling has helped a lot, because the journaling allows me to see the whole picture, and then allows me to choose the narrative that I want to embrace. And that is helping me like reroute neural pathways. It's helping me change from a negative perspective to a positive perspective. Like, if I'm mad at a certain person and I'm writing about it, whether I'm really mad or not, like, I always like, in that sense, I feel like I'm like David from the Bible, like, start with the complaint. Like, one of these days I put like my wife, this and that, blah, blah, blah. But I'm like, but she loves me.
I do.
And I'm like, we have a beautiful relationship. And I even put a question like, David, do you want it to work with her? And I put, yes, I do. Aww. And so like, just with the journaling, it's helping me like reroute things, where just like, I'm stopping the pattern of, cause like easily, like I always go to, she's always like this. All the contempt comes in. She's always like this. She never does this. Like, all like the absolutes just come out. And like through the journal, I'm like, no, like, I don't know. It's something about writing it down that just helps me like process. And I'm like, no, like, we're good together. We're happy together. We enjoy each other's company. We have a beautiful family. We love our kids. Like, it just, and as I'm writing it, I'm like, it's like it just blows off the steam.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay. Like,
I agree. And that's why I think everyone should journal, because your mind, I don't even have like the math. I'm sure we can look it up, but like it thinks so many thoughts per second, per minute. Like it's just like you can think multiple thoughts at the same time. Like it's this machine, like this fast growing machine. But when you are writing something down, you can't write as fast as your mind goes. So you have to pick, like, what am I going to write? So it kind of slows your mind. So you say, because then you can look out at the bigger picture and choose which thoughts am I entertaining, which thoughts am I zooming in, rather than if you don't, the story just goes on its own and it just takes the power and it could just make up a whole thing in such a short amount of time. Versus if we pause, then we have to be intentional of like, which thoughts are we going to focus on? What are we going to write down? It gives us time to like our brain to be like, let's just put the brakes on a little bit. Like, I don't know how to explain it. Like, I hope that makes sense. But as you were talking about, I was thinking, so I'm reading this book called The Story of the Old Testament, right?
Okay.
And it is saying how there's a clear story through the Old Testament, but how if we get focused on one narrative, which is what you're saying, like if we get focused on one narrative, it can seem like God is like a cruel God. And everyone usually says God from the Old Testament is so cruel compared to like God from the New Testament, which he's known for his grace.
Yeah.
And the author's purpose of the story of the Old Testament is like, no, he is the same through and through. Like you see God's grace time and time again, but we focus on this one narrative, right? Like we focus on God hardening Pharaoh's heart. We focus on God waiting till the last minute to give Abraham a son and then asking him to sacrifice. When if we look back and we see all of these stories mixed together, we can see God's redeeming hand. We can see God's love story to humanity saying like, I want to save you.
Yeah.
I'm giving you time to be saved. And so it's interesting how you're saying, because it's true. Like, we focus on this one story and we don't zoom out, we can miss the whole thing God is trying to teach us. And it's difficult because in that moment, our emotions are so tied to that narrative, because that's the beauty and the downfall of stories, that it is emotionally provoking. That's a good story. Like our lives are stories. We're not going to be emotionally detached from it, but we have to be careful because, again, we've said emotions is not truth. So if that moment, that narrative is very sad or it's very heavy, if we don't remind ourselves this is just a little bit of it, and you say like zoom out and see what is that bigger picture, what is this common thread, this theme that goes through each story, we can see goodness in it. Because every, even good story, think of your favorite movie, your favorite book, your favorite show, all of those good parts were good because of the downs, because of the conflict, because of this tension that the character had to face. But we pick apart our story and just get the tension out when we're like, you just missed like the rest of it, like the beauty of it. So I think it's so important to be intentional, pausing, reflecting, zoom out and say, what is it that's really happening in my life? And reinsert like the message that God wants us to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Two things. One, when you were talking about writing things down, you know what came up to my mind? When you do a math problem,
have to
can you do it in your head? If I tell you,
I need fingers, I need paper.
If I tell you 1,184 times 1,275, can you do that in your head? I don't know many people that could. You need a piece of paper to work the problem out.
Yeah.
You need to go through the process, put the little zero, go in the next one, and that's how you work. And same thing, like there's only so much, like it's almost like there's only so much paper that your mind has, where you're, again, like we talked about that piece of paper with the dot in it. Like what do you see? You only see the dot. Like in your brain, you might only be able to see the dot on the page. And so writing it down, it starts helping you solve the problem and just like, oh, like now I'm starting to see all of it and it's there. Because in your mind, it could be there 1 second and gone the next. And you're just like, Or you might be barreling down the hill of negativity like a Salvadorian would do.
Yeah.
It's like, she's always like this. She's never like this. She always does this. She never has my back, blah, 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 blah. And just like, you miss the rest of it. But if you write it down, you start saying, hey, you know what? Like, no. Like, you start remembering everything. You can write it down and just like, no.
Yeah. And I think that's good because we're in that time, especially now, like students have it so easy where they can do math problems on a calculator or now even on the notes. Like it looks like you're writing it down like to solve a word problem and then automatically it'll just solve it for you, which is crazy. I mean, it's cool technology, but they are not learning the process. They are not growing that muscle. They're not bettering themselves. And so many of us want to do it that way. Like, oh, I could just do it like this, right? That's putting your emotions, putting your like under the rug, right? It's just the easy way out. Let me just put it in the calculator. Boom. All right. I'm just going to move on to the next part of my life. I'm going to move on to the next part of my life. And that's not producing character. That's not producing the perseverance and endurance where the Bible talks about tough times can produce that, but it's going through it, working it out, practicing that muscle. Like that is difficult. It's going to hurt. It's going to cause soreness and but we want so much like the easy out. Let me just put it in. Let me just solve it this way. Let me just hide it here.
Yeah.
And that is not going to produce character.
The other thing that I was thinking about was we've talked about when we were talking about the atomic habits. What's the one thing that our brains always run to? And it's always the easiest path to whatever it is that you want, right? And what that translates to, it is comfortability. And I feel like as humans, we tend to run towards comfortability and this thing people call happiness, which, I mean, I think we are in agreement there's not really a thing called happiness.
Or its happiness is fleeting.
It's something temporary. And I feel like with the stories that we tell sometimes, that's what we're running to. Comfortability. Like, how can I tell this story differently where it's going to make me feel comfortable?
Yeah.
And comfortability might be something positive, as in like what I would do when I was going through hard times. Like, nope, God's got me. We're all good. Like, the bad doesn't really even exist. You know, it has no power. Like I was basically what I was doing is negative emotions blocked. Like processing negative emotions blocked, just block. And the word that I use is disassociating. Where I was just like, no, I'm not feeling that. I'm not feeling that. And it's not for the sake of they're not real. It's just don't know how to deal with it. So I'm going to put you guys away and I'm just going to continue forward, just preaching and testifying. God is good. Look at everything that I'm going bad through and God is still good and blah. That made me feel comfortable, but it didn't. It serviced me for the sake of survival, but it did not service me in order to be completely healthy, because what I was looking for in those moments was, how can I be comfortable? How can I feel like I'm surviving? How can I feel like I'm going to make it through this, right? And there's a huge difference between comfortability and quote unquote happiness and peace and joy. There's a huge difference. Why? Because in the way that I was doing it, I had a false sense of peace, that's for sure. But it wasn't true peace, because I believe true peace comes with, I see the full picture.
Yeah.
I see the enemies and I see the table. I have felt the enemies and I've seen the table. I have processed these feelings of fear and rejection and hurt and pain and wounds and bleeding out and not knowing what to do with all that. Feeling like I'm falling into a pit of depression. Like, I've seen all that, felt it. And now is when I know God still got me. That's what I believe peace is you taking it all in and knowing that God's got you. That's a peace that surpasses all understanding, because the understanding and the logical brain goes, buddy, this all sucks. You can't deal with none of it. But the surpassing all understanding goes, I can't deal with this, but God can.
Yeah.
And God's with me, and we're going to work through this together. And that's where the joy comes in.
That's good. Because I think people, at least like the religious background we come in and the religious folks maybe we've come across, and even ourselves, it's denial. It's just denial, right? And so we see this, how you said, like this pretense, like we see this joy that they're talking about, but they're denying the situation. And it's like, no, God made us humans. God never talks about tough situations are going to be like completely erased from our life. But they, in their head, like they can't rationalize how a good God can let these things happen. So they just like denial. Yeah. Doesn't exist.
Yep.
Because they haven't made that connection, how your story can be filled with hurt. It can be filled with ugliness. It can be filled with God. But I think they have to face that. Like, who is the God I believe in? It's not this like fairy tale genie God, like everything's good. It's this God who works through the brokenness. But I think it's just denial.
I mean, let's talk about a guy from the Bible, Job. Imagine the stories that dude could have told himself. Imagine the route that he could have gone down.
And the stories that his friends were trying to tell him, like, this is the God that you are like not wanting to curse.
That represents a good amount of our lives.
Yeah.
Like we've gone through some hard things. But God is still good.
Yeah.
And that's the reality of it. Like, but to be in Job's shoes, again, 10 people could be in Job's shoes and you'll get 10 different stories that come out of it. And then what you need to ask yourself is, how is this story servicing me or disservicing me? Do I have true peace? Do I have true joy? And like, I guess transitioning over to like a more positive note, like what do you feel like are positive stories that you should be telling yourself?
I want to touch on something you said, and then I'll answer your question of what are some positive stories. Because there was, I wish I had the quote. I'm like trying to see if I can pull it up, and I don't think I can. But there is, again, it's the story of the Old Testament. And he was just saying how many of the, for example,
Wait, who was saying?
The author of the story of the Old Testament. So it's a book called The Story of the Old Testament.
Oh, okay.
And there's this author. And again, he's trying to tell us, like, the story is just God's redeeming love. Like how we failed, and you see throughout all of these different narratives, God trying to establish a relationship that we had in the Garden of Eden, right? So there's this one part he's talking about, like Moses and Pharaoh, and how there's these plagues, right? So there's like 10 plagues that he keeps giving to the Egyptians. It says he's hardening Pharaoh's heart, but it says these difficulties is so that the Israelites can know God. Like, this is the God that you're serving. This is how glorious I am. This is how powerful I am. And so I think a lot of the difficulties that we go in through life is so that we know the God that we serve, so we can seek him more and go to him more. But the problem with denial and the problem with our past generations or past church culture is that when we deny the difficulties and the hardships, we're not getting to know God on a more intimate level. Because that's the whole point. I feel like God uses the refining moments, and we've said this in the past. He uses the fire to form a beautiful relationship. And I see it like in our marriage. Like, if we didn't go through the ugly parts of our marriage, I wouldn't get to know your heart, like the raw, vulnerable heart that David is. I would just like be in denial and tell myself the story that I'm making up, because I'm not approaching you. I'm not getting to know you. And so I think that's the problem with our, like, this religious culture, is they're not finding this deep intimacy with God, where through the tough times and the good times, they can go to him. It's just like this, like, fairy tale, like this false narrative, I think.
Yeah.
But just wanted to put that.
That's powerful. That's really powerful.
Thank you.
Actually, before we go to the positives, let's list some negative ones that people you think might be saying. Like, And the only reason why I want to say this is because like I want to call it out, like in case somebody's listening to it and like, oh, that one hits home. Like one could be the government is against me. Like certain races are probably saying that right now.
Yeah.
Hispanics for sure. Like the government's out to get me. It's a story that you could be telling. Nobody has my back.
I always feel like I'm not good enough. I'm not a good enough mom.
Yes.
I'm not good enough wife.
I'm not good enough. I'm not worth it. Some of them that aren't even spoken is I don't feel like I'm worth love or worthy of love.
It's too late for me to achieve this. I wasted so much time, or like that's never going to happen to me. Good things have never come my way.
I don't try things because I'm going to fail. What else? You don't think of anything else?
No, well, I think most of those, I mean, I've seen it in like that middle school, because I feel like elementary, I'm not an elementary teacher and I haven't been in an elementary setting in a long time, but I feel like elementary, things seem like pretty easy. And then in middle school, once you start really having one teacher for one subject, that's when students start saying like, I'm not good at math, or I'm not good at reading, or whatever. Like they start labeling themselves. But it is crazy how that story is told when they're still so young. They can change that story. Like you're 11 years old. Like that's not the story you need to write in pen and just like solidify for the rest of your life. Like, but it's crazy. Like there's no sense of wanting to break through this mountain to get to the other side. It's just like,
yeah,
I see it. This is it. And it's like, you're so young. You have a whole life to get up that mountain. Like, why are you already stamping yourself with this?
And I think it's what we've said. Like, I would rather have this label. I'm comfortable with this label. I've been told I am this label. Why try to be anything else than this label and possibly fail? Because then I feel like a double loser. Like, I've already accepted I'm not good in this certain area, that I may feel like a loser in this certain area. Why try and fail and just be like, I completely blew it? Like, why? I should have just, and that's what you get. Like you've seen it in movies, you've seen it in real life, you've seen it, like you've probably heard it in real life with people around you. Like, that's why I never wanted to try it. That's why I should have never done this. That's why I should have never taken this leap of faith.
Yeah.
I knew I shouldn't have done it. Like you get that like hardcore regret. And again, it's just like they tried. And I feel like with those people, like I can resonate with those people because it's like you could tell with those words that they're saying, I knew I should have never tried it. They don't have anybody cheering them in their corner. They don't have anybody giving them encouragement, telling them it's okay. Let's try again and start like smaller, and let's atomic habits, just 1% every single time. Like, no, those people that say that, they have accepted or are telling themselves that story. I have nobody. And if I have nobody, I'm just going to stay in my comfort zone because honestly, like I can't do this on my own.
Yeah. Or do you think even, sorry, we're going to
no, it's okay.
Because I feel like I'm like trying to think of when I was in school, in high school, and let's say there was chemistry or like math and science were not my strong suits. And before, like I already took the test, and before getting the test passed back, like I'd tell like myself, my friends around me, like my classmates hearing me, because maybe they're going to see my test. I'd be like, oh, I already failed. Like, I already know. Just so that if I'm right, it's like, oh, I was right about something. You see, I told you. And so I wonder if it's...
The reason why I'm smiling, if you guys are watching this, is because this woman, every single time, it could be a 20-second speech, it could be a whole freaking preaching. Oh my gosh, I'm nervous. I don't know if I'm gonna mess up and blah 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 blah. And I'm like, every single time you do anything, especially in a speaking engagement, everyone goes, "Oh my gosh, you did so amazing! You're awesome!" And you come home, "Oh my gosh, babe, they left me."
But those nerves are valid. It's not like I don't feel nervous. No, but in this situation that I'm talking about, like, I already say like, oh, I already got a bad grade. Like I didn't even study. I didn't even do this. Just so that if I get it and it confirms, I'm like, oh, you see, I was right about something.
Yeah,
Look,
that's
I
a
was
story
right.
that you're
I was
telling.
right.
Yeah.
Like it's like I guess I don't know. There's comfort in knowing like I knew it like before.
But not only that, but it sounds like you're also in those moments setting the bar low, because it's like if you get any higher, oh my gosh, it's the best thing in the whole world. Like I didn't even do any preparation, blah, blah, blah. But like you said, if you do happen to get a low score, it's just like, well, here's all the reasons why. And here's my justification. Like
it's just like back to a coping mechanism. Because I do see students say that all the time. Like before I even pass it, like, oh, I already failed. Let me see. Like I already know. And it's just like, maybe you're right, but maybe you're not. And I think it's just to prep. I guess it is protection. It's just to protect them.
Yeah. And so, starting to wrap this up, what would be positive stories that you should be telling yourself?
That I do tell myself.
Or that you do tell yourself, yeah.
I think one thing that parents play a crucial role, and something that I've always remember with my dad, I would call my parents every time before like a job interview and everything. I'm like, please pray I get it. And he would just tell me like your name is Grace. Like you're going to walk into that room and they're gonna see grace and God's favor in your life. And you need to remember that like they are looking for you. They're asking for a person like you or something like that. And that just like my name, and I brought it up, someone said like, oh, your name, and just you embody your name of grace. And I feel like my parents not only named me that, but reminded me of my name and reminded me of just who I am. So I think I carry like I say things very gracious because I feel like I can even confront people and they know that I'm coming from a good heart, like just very gracious about it. And so I think that's one thing. I think right now, again, that I'm older and being more mindful about the thoughts that I'm letting into my head, which I think that's what guarding your heart is being proactive and saying, what am I going to let feed my soul, feed my mind? Is I am living such a blessed life. And so reminding myself, like, these are all my answered prayers. And yes, there's tough times, but I'm not going to tell my story of like, oh, I'm always so stressed, or this story of life is just hustle, hustle, hustle. Like I can never get to a moment of peace. Like instead, I'm telling myself, like, this is what you've prayed for. Like, this is the life that is worth living. This is the life that you've always dreamed of. So like, enjoy it. Like this season this is it. Like this is what God has for you. Yeah. And so I think those are two that right now at least stick to me. How about you?
I think for me it would be a story that we all need to tell ourselves is that we are worthy of love. We are worthy to be loved. That we accept ourselves. That we deserve good things. What else? Those are the big ones for me. Those are the ones that I'm working through right now.
That's good. That's good because at least people know like you're not there yet, but you're not giving up. Like they see, I guess, the vulnerability of the past, and you're putting the work because that's the reality for a lot of people. And I think one for me, which I have for some reason, thank God I've had like parents who have never, like when I've started hearing you say like, oh, I'm so dumb, like for little mistakes that you do, that does rub off on me. Cause then I text you like, oh, I'm so dumb. And then I'm just like, that wasn't me. So like, that's also very important because you start to live with them, and then you slowly like take that on. Yeah. But, that was like rare for me because I was like, wait, like I wasn't used to that because I think my parents didn't like label me that. So that was easy. But for some reason, like the imposter syndrome, like that's something I've always had to deal with. Like I knew my parents at least always said I was smart. Like I felt like I was smart, but I never in a class felt like I'm the smartest one, or at least I'm one of the smart ones. Like I never felt that. Even though people maybe have said comments like that, or my family might have said comments like that. College, even worse. I was like a minority. Because in high school, I was a minority. We were all Hispanic. But in college, there was like one or two of us in the class. And I just felt like I'm so behind. Like their vocabulary is so extensive. They probably have been saying these words their whole life or hearing their parents. This is the first time I'm being introduced to this vocabulary. Like I don't belong here. Like I'm not smart enough for this. And even now, like stepping into ministry, like it's weird. It's like this dichotomy, like this tension of like, I know I'm smart. Like I've been told that all my life and I've had things to prove it, but also feeling like I'm just like an imposter. Like I think this because then I start thinking like, maybe I'm not capable of this, of teaching this. Like, do I really know all of this stuff? Like if someone asks me a question, will I know it? Do I have to research it? And so I'm like, then I have to remind myself like every adult, even if they're called for that and even if they do that career, like they have moments of doubt. They have to go back and research. Like they're not going to remember all of these minute facts and details. Like I have to remind myself that if God called me to it and I am a teacher, or like a minister, that is my place. Like that is, I am more than, how you say, like I'm more than enough. Like God is more than enough for me. But I'm like struggling with that like imposter syndrome of like never enough. So I think that's a story that I'm having to constantly like battle.
Could you look at yourself in the mirror and say, I am smart?
I haven't.
But could you? Because like my therapist asked me the same thing. Like, oh, could you look at yourself in the mirror and say these things? And I'd be like, I'd cringe. Like I could say it because I know that I have to, but that I fully believe it. I don't know if I'd
fully believe it. I feel like I'd always have to like work hard. Like it doesn't come natural. Like I don't know naturally these stuff, you know? Like, I don't know, maybe I'm putting so high expectations on what smart means. Because for me, like, if I call someone smart, I have faith that, like, this all just lives in them. Like, they're just walking encyclopedias or, like, walking textbooks, right? Like, people always tell me, like, oh, you're the history teacher, so you're gonna... I'm like, no, I'll Google it. I'll learn about it. Like, I'm constantly, like, teaching myself to teach my students. Like, I feel like it doesn't come naturally to me. Like, with the Bible, like, I get passionate, but, like, I have to... I've read it a lot. Like... Even then, I'm like, oh, I don't remember. Let me look. You know, like I feel like I have insight, and people are like, you're wise, but I feel like I work hard in it. Like it's not something that just naturally. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think it the way that it sounds like you're looking for a way to the same thing as what you would do with your grades, to put the bar lower, just in case. Like you'd rather put it lower, and that's something that I learned in my life too. Yeah, I think I told you that story where, our schools would be broken up into 2 semesters. In the first semester, I would start off with like let's say an A, and in the second semester, I'd end off with like a B. And my mom would be like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "B's still good." She's like, "No, you started with an A, you end with an A." And I'd be like, "Okay, fine, then I'll do it the other way around. I'll start with a C, and then I'll end up with a B plus or an A." And then there you go. Like I set the bar low and I improved from there. And like, what if you're kind of doing the same thing? You're saying to yourself, I have to work for it. Like it doesn't come natural to me. And you're just like, let me knock it down a peg. And now I can't say, oh, I'm just a wise person. It comes natural to me. Like, no, I have to work for it. But I mean, anybody needs to work for anything. That's great. Yeah. And then the other thing is, I remember I said the same thing to somebody else. And I guess I'm going to say it to you. And it's like, when you doubt yourself, especially being Christ-centered, when you doubt yourself, you doubt what God put in you. Mm-hmm. And when you doubt what God put in you, you're doubting God. Yeah. And so that's something to think about as well. But also, it seems like we are pretty similar in some situations. And I think there's something in you that just doesn't let you fully just click. Like I think there's a level of fear in you that goes, I can't set the bar too high because if I fall short, it's going to hurt me a lot. Like if somebody says to me like, nah, you're overrated. Nah, like, and then you also have to think like I believe that you need to get to a point of that confidence. And again, that confidence doesn't just come from all the work that you've put in, but it comes from the Lord, right? Yeah. And so have that confidence. And even if one day somebody, because I mean, the reality is, and everybody says it, when you do great things, you're going to have haters no matter what. No matter what. No matter how great you're doing things, no matter how much you love people, no matter that you're giving away millions of dollars, whatever it is that you're doing, you're always going to have somebody, right, that says something bad about you. And so I think you need to get to a point where you have that confidence coming from the Lord. So him pouring it out, like you going into the river of life and just like you're getting the source from God or whatever, the confidence. And if the one day you have that person say like you're overrated, just have that like that's obviously something that you have to work on.
Yeah.
Like whether it's like God, like constantly praying about it, like asking him to work with you on it. Like I want to have that confidence where even if somebody comes up to me and says something messed up, like I'm going to be well rooted in you and they ain't insulting me.
Yeah.
You know? But it does sound like that. It sounds like you're having a protection because of fear. It's like, let me set the bar low because then I'll never get called underrated. And
I think, I mean, I've told you this before. All my life, like I would, this is not a bad word. Hopefully people don't take it bad, but like half-assed it. Because I feel like it's easier to say like, oh, I didn't even try and look how good I got. Versus I tried so hard and look how I didn't even get close to like what I wanted.
Yeah.
And so now in my life, I'm like, okay, what are things that I need to like fine tune? What are things that I need to put the effort, because I don't want to operate through this fear, but I want to operate through like my God-given talent. Like this, God, this is where you've called me. So I'm going to trust in you, but I want to be faithful because that's what faith is. Like faith without works is dead. So I want to be faithful and be good steward of the gifts that you've given me. It's like, I'm not going to, that's why I'm like trying. I posted it on Instagram today. Like because I did have a conversation with my future sister-in-law and my brother. I'm like, dang, look how much I achieved with being like a chaotic mess. Like, it's impressed. I'm impressed. I'm like, I can't believe I've gone so long with my life with just like, what do I have to do today? Oh, okay, let me just try to just do it. Like no sense of organization, no sense of following this schedule, like nothing. And I'm like, okay, that worked in that season, but am I being a good steward? Like, what is the potential? And maybe part of me thinks like, is the lie of like, no, I can't work with this rigid schedule. Like I can't, like it's not me. Like I feel like that's a lie you tell yourself where it's like, you don't even know. You haven't even tried it. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to try it. And part of me is like, can I even maximize what I'm already doing? Like, is this even going to help? Because I feel like I'm already at my limit.
Yeah.
And so a part of me is like, is it even worth it? But it's like, that's not my call. My call is to be a good steward of what God has. And if he uses me more, awesome. But if he doesn't, I'm being a good steward. And that in itself is great. And not me like trying to, I guess it's trying to manipulate the outcome based off of like how little I put in or how good versus just like be consistent, good stewards and let God do the rest.
Yeah.
If that made sense.
And one common denominator that I keep hearing in our whole conversation, which I've enjoyed. This has been a pretty good conversation.
I'm glad.
Thank you. But it's fear.
Yeah.
It's fear. A lot of the stories that we tell ourselves is based out of fear. Fear of feeling a certain feeling. And when I think about that word fear, like I think about both in the secular and spiritual world. Secular, if you look at any greats, any motivational speakers that talk about the greats, like you hear about Michael Jordan of how many shots he took and how many shots he missed.
Yeah.
But how many shots he made and that counted like big time. And so like the whole point of that is like, don't be afraid to take all of your shots and some of them don't be afraid to miss. Wayne Gretzky, I think, has a famous quote that says, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. Why are you not taking those shots? Out of fear of missing them.
Yeah.
Again, and any motivational speaker will be like, don't be afraid to fail. As long as you never give up, it's not true failure. Like all the motivational speakers are speaking against fear. And how many times does it say in the Bible, do not fear?
Yeah.
Do not fear. Do not fear. And I feel like the point of it is like, again, kind of like what the motivational speakers are saying. Take your shots. Take your shots. You're going to miss some of them. It's fine. But the ones that count, you're going to make them.
Yeah.
And you don't know which ones actually are the ones that are going to count. Like, if you look at Michael Jordan's points or whatever, the ones that he made, like, did he know in that specific game, at that specific second, he was going to score the winning bucket? He didn't know before he took the shot. He took the shot and he relied on his skills and all that stuff or whatever. But before that moment happened, he did not know it was going to happen.
Yeah.
And had he been afraid, he would have never taken that shot. And same thing in general life. And that's why God continues to say, do not fear, do not fear, do not fear, do not fear. Don't fear. Because in reality, when we really look at it through God's eyes, what is it that we're fearing? People's opinions on us? Rejection? And that's why it's so important for us to be rooted well in God.
Yeah.
For our roots to be getting its nourishment from his river. And it's when you have that type of confidence, winds can blow, deserts or droughts can come, and you're going to be completely fine. Mm-hmm. And that's why, I was telling you, your confidence needs to come from the Lord. Because if it does, 10,000 people over here can call you overrated, and 10,000 people over here will call you suck at what you're doing. And guess what? You'll be like, it is what it is. You 10,000 might be complaining, but those millions over there say that I'm doing a great job. Mm-hmm. And it's just so I think that is a common denominator that we're fighting against.
Yeah, for sure.
And when you guys are having these conversations with whoever you're having the conversations with, or maybe it's just you're having a conversation with yourself, ask yourself, what stories am I telling myself that are helping me avoid fear? And if you do find some, just know that those stories are hindering you big time, if not completely stopping your growth. And if you really want to be better every single day, you got to cling on to God and you got to say, hey, buddy, we need to work with this. We need to work on this together.
Yeah.
And I mean, that God's always going to be there. God's always going to be there. He's just waiting for you to invite him into the process. But grab onto his hand and be like, hey, you see that pile of bunch of fear over there? We got to work through it. We got to clean this out. And he's going to be like, bet, let's go. I've been waiting for you to say that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I hope that either during this episode you paused it, and if you didn't pause it after this episode is done, that you're having a time of reflection, that you're having conversations with loved ones about this topic, because it is very important. Again, if we don't call these things out, if we don't identify these things, then we may be hindering ourselves for the rest of our lives. And then that's not something that you want to do. I'm pretty sure you don't want to be bitter for the rest of your life. I'm pretty sure you don't want to be 80 and thinking, oh man, I never did anything. I was too afraid to make those leaps of faith. You don't want to get to those points. And so I would encourage you, have those time of reflections, have a time of prayer, ask God to be in part of your process, have conversations with friends, with loved ones, with your spouses, with whoever, to help you process this and start working on it. And again, nobody's asking you to be fixed from one day to another, because many of these stories that you've been telling yourself these stories for many, many years. And so just think about the atomic habits again. 1% every single day, and you're going to get out of those stories and start telling yourself the real good stories that are going to help you flourish and just be your best self. One episode at a time. Boom.
That's good.
We want to thank you so much for tuning into this episode. We love you guys very, very much. We are trying our best to give you guys stuff that are really going to help you guys. We're trying our best to be vulnerable as well. We're trying our best any way possible to be able to be of service and of help to you guys. And so we really appreciate you guys' time. We would really appreciate if you hit the thumbs up button, if you subscribed, if you haven't subscribed, if you can share this video, if you feel like it's positive and it's blessed your life and it might bless somebody else's life, that would be of great service to us. We would appreciate it a lot. We love you guys, and we will see you guys on the next one. Bye.